Unlike most of the African diaspora in the so-called New World, the history of Afro-Puerto Ricans does not begin with slavery, but with the arrival of African men called libertos, who served alongside Spanish conquistadors in taking over the island of Puerto Rico. One of the descendants of these first free African men was Francis Gallego, who was known as the first entrepreneur of African descent in Puerto Rico. The libertos were Christianized and spoke Spanish fluently. The libertos had the freedom to move about and seek economic opportunities on the island of Puerto Rico. By 1820, there were about 104 free libertos in San Juan, the capital of Puerto Rico today. Though they outnumbered the Spaniards, opportunities for them to gain equal rights were limited. During this time, they primarily lived in restricted areas and were not able to choose freely their occupations or have access to social institutions. Even though they were able to use their legal position to acquire some wealth, they still experienced racial discrimination. The primary reason African slaves were brought into Puerto Rico was because the original Taino population was being decimated as a labor force. Friar Bartolome de las Casas, who had accompanied Ponce de Leon to the new island of Puerto Rico, was outraged at the Spanish treatment of the Taino Indians, and in 1512, he protested to the Spanish court. He fought for the freedom of the natives and was able to secure their rights, but the Spanish colonists, fearing the loss of their labor force, also protested before the courts. They complained that they needed manpower to work in the mines, build forts, and so on. Ironically, as an alternative, Las Casas suggested the importation and use of African slaves. Thus, in 1517, the Spanish crown permitted its subjects to import enslaved African people. These early enslaved Africans were brought originally to work on the gold mines, even though they also worked on sugarcane plantations. They became artisans, domestic laborers, ship merchants, and dock workers. Just a short time after their arrival, in 1527, the first major slave rebellion occurred in Puerto Rico, as dozens of Afro-Puerto Ricans fought against the colonists in a brief revolt. A few Afro-Puerto Ricans retreated to the mountains, where they resided as Maroons with surviving Tainos. During the following centuries, by 1873, Afro-Puerto Ricans had carried out more than 20 revolts. Some were of great political importance, such as the Ponce and Vega Baja conspiracies. Even though the original Afro-Puerto Rican was a free man, coming to the island as a soldier, the overwhelming majority of the ancestors of Afro-Puerto Ricans today are descended from enslaved Africans. According to one historian, the exact origin of Afro-Puerto Ricans can be said to be primarily the Gold Coast of Ghana, Nigeria, and the African state of Dahomey, many of which coming from the Yoruba and Igbo ethnic group.